My daughter said she just wanted to help me manage my money. But the truth was far darker. Now, I'm going to tell you everything she did and how I handled it. If you think you would have dealt with it differently, tell me in the comments. I remember that day so clearly, because it was the first time my own daughter talked to me like I was a fragile old woman. The rain had just stopped outside, and I was standing by the kitchen window in my small house in Newport, Oregon, waiting for the kettle to whistle. The house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. When I heard the sound of a car door slamming, I wiped my hands on a towel and looked out. Vanessa's blue SUV was parked in the driveway. She and her husband Brian were walking up the path, laughing about something on his phone. Vanessa barely knocked before opening the door. She had that confident tone she always used when she thought she was being helpful. "Mom, we need to talk about something important." She sat down at the kitchen table without waiting for an invitation. Brian followed behind her, setting his coffee on my counter like he owned the place. I remember thinking how strange it felt, standing in my own kitchen and feeling like a guest. I poured tea into 3 cups and sat down. Vanessa leaned forward, her hands folded like she was in a meeting. "Mom, starting next month, we're going to move your retirement deposits and savings into a joint account under my name." I blinked, trying to understand what I had just heard. She kept going, her voice calm and professional. "It'll be easier that way. You won't have to stress about bills or taxes. I'll handle everything for you." She said it like it was a favor, like I couldn't possibly manage my own money at 68. Brian nodded, sipping his coffee. "Yeah. Mom, Vanessa's great with finances. You'd be better off letting her take care of things." I looked at them both. My daughter, who I'd raised alone since her father passed, was sitting there, telling me I was no longer capable of managing my own life. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I studied her face, the way she tilted her chin when she felt in control, the little smile she gave when she thought she'd won. I'd seen that same expression when she was a teenager and used to sneak my car keys out of my purse. Inside, I felt something shift. Not anger. Not yet. Just a cold, sharp awareness. My daughter wasn't offering help. She was taking control. I reached for my teacup, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uneasy. Then I said softly, "That sounds fine, sweetheart. If you think that's what's best." Her smile widened instantly. I knew that smile. It wasn't affection. It was triumph. She thought she'd just crossed a finish line. "Good," she said, standing up and leaning over to kiss my forehead. "It's for your own good. Mom, you don't have to worry about anything anymore." She said it again. "For your own good." Those words hung in the air like the smell of burnt coffee. I watched them gather their coats and head for the door. Vanessa called back cheerfully, "We'll come by for dinner tomorrow." When the door shut behind them, the house fell back into its usual silence. Only this time, it felt heavier. I sat there at the table, hands still wrapped around the warm cup, listening to the faint rumble of their car pulling away. "For your own good." That phrase rolled through my head again and again. I thought about the years I'd worked 2 jobs just to give her the life she wanted. I thought about the late nights counting every dollar, trying to make sure the bills were paid. The way I'd skipped new shoes so she could have the best sneakers in school. And now, here she was, sitting in the same kitchen, deciding I wasn't capable anymore. But instead of crying, I laughed quietly. A small, dry laugh that surprised even me. I realized something in that moment. Vanessa had no idea who she was talking to. She still thought of me as the mother who would do anything for her, who would sign anything she handed me, who would never say no. I rinsed out the teacups and set them upside down on the rack. The kettle had gone cold, but I didn't mind. As I turned off the lights and walked toward my bedroom, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My hair had more silver now, and the lines on my face were deeper. But my eyes, they looked steady, alive. That night, as I got into bed, I stared up at the ceiling and thought, if she wants to take control, let her think she can. Let her play her little game. She'll learn soon enough who she's really dealing with. Outside, the rain started again. Light and steady against the windows. It was the sound I'd always loved. The kind that made you feel safe even when the world was shifting. I closed my eyes and listened. Calm and certain that tomorrow would bring exactly what I needed, proof. When morning came, the sky was pale and quiet, and I woke up earlier than usual. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, watching the soft light crawl across the floor. It's funny how the smallest moments can suddenly carry the weight of an entire lifetime. I thought about Vanessa as a little girl, her hair in messy braids, running around this same house with her stuffed rabbit. For a while, those memories warmed me. Then they turned bitter. I made myself breakfast, just toast and eggs, and sat at the table that used to be full of chatter years ago. I tried to imagine at what point things had shifted, when the warmth between us had been replaced by that polite distance she now used. Maybe it was after her father died, or maybe it was after I refused to co-sign that business loan. It was 2015. I remember it too well. Vanessa had just turned 25. Full of ideas and confidence. She wanted to open her own beauty store. Said she didn't need investors. Just a little help from me. She brought papers, already printed and highlighted. All I had to do was sign. She talked about brand partnerships and marketing strategies like she was running a Fortune 500 company. I told her I didn't have that kind of money. She insisted. Said the bank just needed my signature as collateral. She promised she'd handle the payments. I remember that day in the bank office. The air cold from the AC. The pen heavy in my hand. Something told me not to do it. Still, I signed. 6 months later, the store was gone. She never mentioned it again. I ended up paying off that loan for nearly 5 years. Every time I wrote a check, I reminded myself it was for my daughter's future, that she would eventually learn responsibility. I should have known better. That memory came back to me now like a warning, whispering from the past. I finished my coffee and opened the window to let the ocean breeze in. Newport had always been my peace, the sound of waves mixing with the faint cry of seagulls. But that morning, even the ocean sounded restless. Around noon, I called Alice, my neighbor for almost 20 years. She was one of those women who always knew what was happening in the neighborhood without ever seeming nosy. She came over with her knitting bag and a loaf of banana bread. I told her about what Vanessa had said the day before, how she wanted to move my savings into her account. Alice frowned. Her needles paused mid-air. That doesn't sound right. Maggie. She always called me Maggie. If she's offering to help, that's one thing. But taking control of your money, that's a red flag. I shrugged, pretending it didn't bother me. Maybe she's just worried about me. Alice gave me that look older women give when they know you're lying to yourself. Honey, you've worked your whole life. Don't let anyone treat you like you're helpless. Her words lingered long after she left. I sat back in my chair and looked at the photos on the wall. One from Vanessa's high school graduation, another from her wedding. In both, she was smiling wide, and I looked proud. Tired, but proud. Now, I wondered if I had been proud of her or of the idea of being a good mother. That afternoon, I pulled out my old photo albums. Buried between pages was a picture of Vanessa at 10, holding up a handmade Mother's Day card. On the back, in her messy handwriting, it said, "I'll always take care of you, Mom." I traced the words with my finger and felt the sting behind my eyes. Maybe she still believed that, in her own twisted way. Maybe this was her version of taking care of me. Later that day, I went into my small office to organize my bills. My retirement check from the library still came in on the first of each month. My savings, what was left of it, sat in a simple account at Oregon Credit Union. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I'd built it one paycheck at a time. One missed vacation. One skipped dinner out. Every number on that statement carried a story. When I logged into my account, I stared at the balance. The numbers glowing on the screen. I imagined Vanessa having access to it, moving money around without telling me, deciding what was best for me. The thought made my chest tighten. I closed the laptop and took a slow breath. That night, I made soup and ate alone. The rain had started again, tapping against the window in a soft rhythm. I thought about how things used to be when Vanessa still called me just to talk. Before she got married, before she moved an hour away, before every visit started feeling like a business meeting. I remembered the day she brought Brian home for the first time. He was polite but distant, shaking my hand like I was a stranger. I had cooked a roast, spent the whole day cleaning, but he barely looked up from his phone. Vanessa laughed at his jokes, touched his arm constantly, like she needed to prove something. After they left, I told myself it was just nerves, that he'd warm up eventually, but he never really did. Now, years later, they came to my house only on Fridays, just before dinner. They always left with full stomachs and leftovers in containers, and I never once saw them bring so much as a bottle of wine. I used to tell myself it was fine, that at least they were visiting. But sitting in that quiet kitchen now, I realized what had really been happening. They weren't visiting me. They were using me. I turned off the stove and leaned against the counter, feeling a strange mix of sadness and resolve. I knew I couldn't stop Vanessa from trying to take over my money, but maybe, just maybe, I could stop her from succeeding. Before bed, I opened the drawer where I kept important papers: birth certificate, property deed, bank forms. I ran my hand over them like they were armor. Then I took out an empty folder and labeled it with a single word: proof. The next time Vanessa asked me to sign something, I would be ready. Outside, the rain eased into a soft drizzle. I got into bed and let the sound carry me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small or tired. I felt awake, clear. I didn't know what Vanessa was planning exactly, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever she was about to start, I was going to finish. 2 days later, Vanessa showed up again. I heard her car before I saw her. The sound of gravel crunching in the driveway. She didn't call ahead. Just like always. I was folding laundry in the living room when she walked in, holding a manila envelope tight against her chest. She smiled. That practiced smile she used when she wanted something. "Hi, Mom," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "I brought the paperwork. It'll only take a few minutes." I kept folding towels, pretending to take my time. Paperwork for what? Exactly. Vanessa laughed lightly, as if I was being silly. "For the accounts. Remember the ones I told you about? I already talked to the bank. They just need your signature." She slid the envelope toward me. Her nails were freshly painted, pale pink, perfectly shaped. I noticed because I used to have hands like that once, before years of scrubbing, typing, and cooking wore them down. I took the envelope and opened it. Inside were several pages, all covered in fine print. At the top of one page, I saw the words "Financial Authorization Form." I started reading line by line. Slowly, Vanessa shifted in her seat, tapping her nails against the table. "Mom, it's standard. I just need you to sign here. And here. Then we can set up automatic transfers so I can pay your bills for you. It'll make life easier for both of us." I pointed to a line halfway down the page. "What does this part mean?" "About full access and authority." She waved her hand like it was nothing. "That's just legal wording. It means I can help you make transactions without bothering you for approval every time. Every time. Those words echoed in my mind. Brian's name appeared in small print near the bottom as a secondary contact. My stomach tightened. I set the papers down carefully. "Honey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe I should look these over before I sign." Vanessa's smile faltered just a little. "Mom, you don't need to. It's all basic stuff. Trust me." That phrase again. Trust me. I had trusted her before. And it cost me 5 years of payments and sleepless nights. I looked her right in the eyes. "I do trust you, Vanessa. But I also like to read things before I sign. It's just how I am." She sighed, loud and impatient, then leaned back in her chair. "Fine. If that makes you feel better. But I need them soon. We're meeting the banker on Monday." When she left, she kissed my cheek quickly, almost out of habit, then walked out without another word. I watched her drive away, the envelope still sitting on my table. The air felt heavy, like the room had shrunk. I didn't open the papers again that night. I waited until the next morning. When the house was quiet and my mind was clear, I sat at the same table, poured myself a cup of coffee, and read every single line. The more I read, the colder I felt. It wasn't just permission to view my account. It was full power of attorney over all my financial decisions. She could transfer, withdraw, or even close accounts under my name. I sat there for a long time, the pages trembling slightly in my hands. Somewhere between the second and third page, I started to shake my head and whisper under my breath, "No, not this time." By noon, I drove over to the small law office across from the post office. The gold letters on the window read Coleman and Associates. Sarah Coleman had been a friend of Alice's for years. She was one of those women who always made you feel like you still had options, no matter how bad things looked. Sarah greeted me kindly and offered coffee. "What brings you in today?" "Mrs. Hill." I handed her the papers. "My daughter wants me to sign these. She says it's to help manage my money." Sarah read for less than a minute before setting them down. "Mrs. Hill, if you sign this, you're giving your daughter complete control of your finances. She could take every penny you have, and it would be perfectly legal." Her words sank into me like cold water. "So, what should I do?" She smiled faintly. "If you want to keep the peace for now, you can pretend to agree. Sign a version that looks official but names me as the authorized agent instead. That way, if she tries to use it, she won't be able to touch your accounts." I blinked, half in disbelief. "You can do that, it's perfectly legal," she said. "And it'll protect you." I nodded slowly, feeling both relief and a strange sadness. I never imagined I'd need to outsmart my own child. Sarah made a few quick edits on her computer, printed the new version, and showed me where to sign. My hand didn't tremble at all this time. When I got home, I replaced the original papers in the envelope and sealed it back up. That evening, Vanessa called. "Hey, Mom. Did you have time to look everything over?" I smiled into the phone, keeping my voice warm. "Yes, honey. I signed them." "Great," she said, her voice brightening instantly. "I'll stop by tomorrow to pick them up." After she hung up, I sat back and stared at the envelope on the counter. The smell of ocean salt drifted through the open window, mixing with the faint hum of the refrigerator. I wasn't sure if what I felt was guilt or power, maybe both. The next day, when Vanessa came, she didn't even sit down. She snatched the envelope and thanked me quickly, as if she couldn't wait to get it to the bank. I watched her walk away, hair bouncing, heels clicking on the driveway. I whispered under my breath, "Careful not to let the words leave the room. You have no idea what you just carried out of here." That night, I opened my old notebook and started writing down everything that had happened, every date and conversation. I didn't know exactly what was coming, but I could feel it. Something was shifting. And this time, I would be ready. When I finally turned off the light, I lay awake, listening to the ocean. Calm but steady, like a reminder that nothing could stay hidden forever. The next morning was bright and clear, but the air carried that sharp chill the coast gets in early spring. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the gulls sweep across the ocean. Everything looked calm, but my mind wasn't. I kept thinking about the envelope Vanessa had taken to the bank, how quickly she'd snatched it off my table. The thought sat heavy in my chest like a stone. Around noon, she called, cheerful as ever. "Hey, Mom. Brian and I are coming by for dinner tonight. I'll bring dessert." Her voice was light, almost too light. I said fine, then hung up before she could add anything else. All afternoon, I moved quietly through the house. I wiped the counters, dusted the picture frames, then stopped and looked around. For years, this house had been full of laughter and noise. And now, every corner held echoes. I stood there for a while, then walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out a stack of moving boxes. I didn't pack everything. Just the things that mattered, the family photos, my late husband's old watch, a few porcelain dishes that had belonged to my mother. I wrapped each piece carefully, like a ritual, until I had filled 4 boxes. Everything else, I decided, could go. By evening, the house looked bare. The walls felt wider somehow, the air different. I had moved the boxes to Alice's garage earlier, asking her to keep them safe for a while. She didn't ask questions, just gave me that knowing look again and said she'd lock them up tight. When the doorbell rang, the sky outside was already turning orange. Vanessa and Brian came in with a box of store-bought cake and 2 bottles of wine. Vanessa's perfume hit me before she even stepped through the door. Strong and sugary. She smiled brightly. "Something smells good. Did you make that stew you always do?" I nodded, ladling soup into bowls. But I could feel her eyes moving around the room. It didn't take long before her smile froze. "Mom, where's all your furniture?" Brian stood behind her, his hands in his pockets, glancing around like he wasn't sure what to say. I set the pot back on the stove and wiped my hands. "I sold it." Vanessa blinked. "Sold it? What do you mean?" "You sold it, just what I said. The sofa, the dining set, the TV. Someone picked them up this morning." Her face tightened, confusion mixing with irritation. "Why would you do that?" I looked her straight in the eye. "Well, since you'll be handling my money now, I figured I wouldn't need all that stuff. I wanted to simplify things." For a moment, she didn't say a word. Then her voice rose. Sharp. "Mom, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't have done that." Brian stepped in quickly. "It's fine. Honey, maybe she just needed a change." But Vanessa wasn't listening. She started pacing, her heels clicking against the floor. "What did you get for it? Who did you sell it to?" "Oh, not much," I said calmly. "Enough to cover groceries for a while." I could see her mind racing, doing the math, trying to figure out where that money went. Then she turned on me again. "You didn't have to do that. Mom, we were about to help you." "Help me?" I asked softly. "Or control me?" Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she didn't have an answer. Brian put a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe we should just eat," he muttered, trying to smooth things over. Dinner was quiet. The only sounds were the clinking of spoons and the distant hum of the fridge. I could feel Vanessa's frustration sitting between us like a storm waiting to break. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight. "I'll take care of the bank transfer first thing tomorrow. Once everything's moved, I'll help you redecorate." I smiled faintly. "That's thoughtful of you." After they left, I stood by the doorway and watched their car disappear down the street. The porch light flickered once, then went out, leaving everything in half darkness. I went back inside and sat in the empty living room. The bare walls reflected the sound of my breathing. I thought about how quickly Vanessa's tone had changed once she realized something was off. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about what she couldn't see. I walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet above the sink. Inside was a small metal box. I pulled it out and opened it, checking the documents inside the original deed. My account statements, and the paper Sarah had drawn up with her own signature. I touched the edge of that paper like it was a lifeline. Then I closed the box and locked it again. When I went to bed that night, I could still hear Vanessa's voice echoing in my mind. "Mom, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't have done that." "Maybe not," I thought. But it got her attention. I turned off the light and let the darkness settle. There was something satisfying in the silence. Something peaceful about knowing the game had changed. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small or powerless. I didn't know what she and Brian would do next. But whatever it was, I was ready. The house might have been empty, but I wasn't. The next morning, I woke up early, long before the sun touched the water. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, listening to the faint creak of the house as it settled. I told myself it was just another day. But something inside me felt restless. I kept glancing at the phone, half expecting Vanessa to call again. She didn't. Instead, I got a text from the Oregon Credit Union reminding me about my account balance update. It was a message I usually ignored. But that morning, I clicked the link. The numbers didn't look right. The balance was lower than I remembered. At first, I thought maybe I had read it wrong. I logged in again and scrolled through the transactions. There it was. Plain as day, a withdrawal of $1,800 made 2 days earlier at a branch in Lincoln City. I hadn't been anywhere near Lincoln City in months. I sat there frozen for a moment, staring at the screen. Then I picked up the phone and called the bank. The woman who answered sounded polite but distracted. She confirmed the withdrawal and asked if I had used my card in person. "No," I said slowly. "I didn't." There was a pause. Then she lowered her voice. "Mrs. Hill, it looks like the card was swiped and a PIN entered. Do you have your card with you?" I opened my wallet and pulled it out. It was there, right where it always was. I told her yes. She hesitated. "You might want to come in." "Ma'am, we can check the security footage and make sure your account is safe." I agreed, hung up, and sat back in my chair. My mind replayed every moment from the past week. Then I remembered. 3 days earlier, Vanessa had come over while I was showering. She had offered to make tea and asked where I kept the sugar. My wallet had been sitting right there on the counter next to the teapot. I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't proof, but it was close enough. I got dressed, grabbed my purse, and drove to the bank. The branch in Newport was small. Just 2 tellers and a manager's office behind glass. The woman who helped me introduced herself as Rebecca. She had a kind face and the kind of voice that made you feel she actually cared. She pulled up my account, clicked through a few screens, then turned the monitor toward me. "Here it is. The withdrawal was made at our Lincoln City location." She pointed to the timestamp, 3:47 p.m. That was the same day Vanessa had dropped off those papers. Rebecca looked at me gently. "We can flag this as suspicious activity. But if someone used your card and PIN, it might be considered authorized unless proven otherwise." I stared at the screen, the numbers swimming in front of my eyes. "I never gave anyone permission," I whispered. She nodded. "I understand. Would you like to print the past 6 months of statements? Sometimes it helps to look through everything carefully." I agreed. And a few minutes later, she handed me a thick envelope. She leaned closer and added quietly, "Keep an eye on your account, and if anything else looks wrong, come straight to me." When I walked out into the parking lot, The air smelled of salt and car exhaust. I stood there for a moment, holding the papers against my chest. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Instead, I drove home, parked, and went straight to the dining table. I spread out the pages one by one. Each line told a story I hadn't agreed to. A grocery store in Eugene, a boutique in Portland, 2 online purchases for home decor, all small enough to avoid attention. But together they formed a pattern. Someone had been quietly draining me. I reached for my notebook and wrote down each suspicious charge, marking dates and amounts. By the time I finished, the daylight had started to fade. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was anger now, cold and steady. Around 6, I called Alice. She answered on the second ring. Maggie. Everything all right? Not really. I think Vanessa's been taking money from my account. There was a long silence on the line. Then Alice said softly, "Come over. Bring the papers." When I walked into her kitchen, she had already made tea. She listened as I explained, her eyes narrowing slightly as I laid the statements on the table. "I don't want to believe it," I said quietly. "But the dates, the amounts, they line up too perfectly." Alice took a sip of tea, then nodded. "You've always trusted her too easily. But now you have proof. Keep everything. Don't confront her yet." I looked down at the pages spread across the table. The word proof echoed in my head. When I got home, I gathered the statements, my old receipts, and my bank card. I placed them in the small metal box under the sink. Right next to the documents Sarah had drawn up. Then I locked it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Vanessa's face. The way she had smiled when she took that envelope. It wasn't the smile of someone helping. It was the smile of someone who already believed she'd won. I got up and walked through the empty house, touching the bare walls, the quiet spaces where furniture used to be. It no longer felt like a loss. It felt like freedom. She could take everything in this world from me except one thing, the truth. In the dim light of the hallway, I caught my reflection again. My hair was messy, my face tired, but my eyes looked sharp, almost unfamiliar. I realized I hadn't seen that version of myself in years. Before going back to bed, I whispered to the dark room, just to hear it out loud. "You picked the wrong mother to steal from, Vanessa." The wind outside carried the faint crash of waves against the shore. Somewhere deep inside me, something steadied. I knew what I had to do next. By the next afternoon, I was sitting at Alice's kitchen table again, the smell of coffee filling the room. She had already called her friend Sarah Coleman, the attorney she'd mentioned before. Sarah agreed to meet me that day. I could tell Alice had been waiting for this moment since I first told her what was going on. She kept saying things like, "You've been quiet long enough, Maggie. It's time to take your power back." When I arrived at Sarah's office, the little brass plaque on the door read Coleman and Associates, Elder Law and Financial Protection. Inside, it smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee. Sarah greeted me with a warm handshake. She was in her early 50s, confident but kind. The kind of woman who looked you straight in the eye and meant every word she said. We sat down in her small office, lined with books and framed degrees. I handed her the folder I'd prepared, the bank statements, the list of withdrawals, the fake authorization papers Vanessa had tricked me into signing. Sarah put on her glasses and started reading, page by page, her face growing more serious by the minute. Finally, she looked up. "Mrs. Hill, you did the right thing, coming to me. This is a clear case of financial abuse. Elder financial abuse. To be specific, what your daughter did is not just wrong. It's illegal." Hearing her say the word illegal made my stomach twist. I had always known it felt wrong, but part of me still didn't want to believe that Vanessa would cross that line. Sarah continued, "Because of the form you signed with my name listed as the secondary authorization, She actually doesn't have legal access to your money. But the withdrawals she made with your card? That's another matter. We can start building a case. I sat there, staring at the papers, the words blurring for a moment. A case. Against my own daughter. She must have seen the hesitation on my face because she leaned forward and said gently, "This isn't about revenge, Mrs. Hill. It's about protection. You're not the only one she could hurt if she keeps doing this." That night, I went home and opened the metal box again. I added the new documents Sarah had printed and labeled them with sticky notes, just the way she showed me. The words she used kept replaying in my head. Protection. Not revenge. Still, something in me wanted Vanessa to see what she had done, to face it. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and paperwork. Sarah contacted the Oregon Credit Union directly. They froze my account temporarily to prevent further withdrawals. Rebecca, the bank teller, called me personally to confirm the security steps. Her kindness steadied me. She told me she'd seen things like this before. Sometimes it was a neighbor or a caregiver. Sometimes, heartbreakingly, it was family. One morning, Sarah called and asked me to come in again. She had something to show me. When I got there, she handed me a document from the state's Department of Justice. It was a report template for elder abuse cases. "We'll file this along with the financial statements," she said. "Once we do, the investigation will begin." The word investigation sent a shiver down my spine. I pictured Vanessa sitting in her modern apartment, sipping her fancy lattes, completely unaware that the paper trail was already closing in on her. That night, Alice came over for dinner. We ate soup and toasted bread in my half-empty kitchen. She told me the neighborhood had been quiet. That spring was coming early this year. I smiled and said, maybe it was time for new beginnings. After dinner, she helped me double-check every file. She was the one who noticed something I'd missed. "Maggie, look at this," she said, pointing to a small note printed on one of the credit statements. There was a new credit card issued under my name 3 months earlier. The mailing address listed was Vanessa's. I felt my pulse quicken. "Sarah will want this," Alice said. "This proves she's been using your identity." We both sat in silence for a while after that. The weight of it all pressed down on me. My own child had turned my name into something she could spend. The next day, I went back to Sarah's office with the new evidence. She examined it carefully and nodded. "This strengthens everything," she said. "With this, the DA could consider pressing charges if it goes that far." I hesitated. "I don't want to ruin her life." Sarah looked at me calmly. "She already started ruining yours, Mrs. Hill. The difference is, you're fighting to get it back." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked out the window at the street below. People walking past with their coffee cups, living ordinary lives. I wondered how many of them carried secrets like mine. Before I left, Sarah gave me her direct number and said, "If she tries to contact you about money again, record it. Keep every message, every voicemail. Documentation is power." That night, I sat in bed with my notebook open. The pages were filling fast now. Dates, amounts, phone calls, and a short note from Sarah's assistant confirming the fraud report had been filed. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to calm. Still, as I closed the notebook, another feeling crept in. Sadness. Maybe. Grief for what I had lost long before the money. The closeness, the trust, the small things that made motherhood feel worth it. I went to the window and looked out at the dark sky over the ocean. The moonlight caught the waves, and I could hear them crash softly in the distance. I thought about the little girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to tell me she'd always take care of me. Somewhere along the way, that promise had broken. I turned from the window and whispered into the empty room. Not out of anger this time, but out of something deeper. I'm not done yet. In the quiet that followed, I realized I meant it. 2 days later, my phone started ringing before sunrise. The sound jolted me awake. Sharp and unfamiliar in the quiet of my small house. I reached for it, still half asleep, and saw Vanessa's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. Then it started again. By the third call, I answered. Her voice came fast and tight. Mom, what is going on? The bank froze your account. They called me saying I'm no longer listed on it. What did you do? I took a slow breath. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I just made some changes. Vanessa, you don't have to worry about it anymore. Her tone shifted, sharp enough to cut glass. Of course, I have to worry. You're making bad decisions. Do you even know what you're doing? I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. More than you think. There was silence on the other end, the kind that hums with barely held anger. Then she said, You've been talking to someone. Haven't you? Who told you to do this? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Finally, she muttered, We're coming over. We need to talk face to face. Before I could respond, she hung up. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand. My pulse was steady, surprisingly calm. It wasn't fear I felt anymore. It was readiness. That afternoon, I called Sarah and told her what had happened. She sighed softly and said, If they show up, don't let them in. Speak through the door if you have to. Remember, you have rights. By the time I hung up, the sky had turned gray and heavy. Around 6 o'clock, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. I went to the window and saw Vanessa's SUV parked at the curb. She got out first, followed by Brian. They didn't bother knocking gently. The first bang rattled the doorframe. I opened it just enough to see their faces. Vanessa looked furious. Brian looked uncomfortably, like he wished he were anywhere else. Mom, this is insane, she said, her words quick and sharp. Why are you doing this? I kept my hand on the doorframe. Doing what? Vanessa, protecting my own money. You're confused, she snapped. You've been manipulated. Who's been filling your head with these ideas? I met her eyes. Steady. The truth. That's all. She let out a bitter laugh. You're being dramatic. Everything I've done was for your good. Brian stepped forward, his voice low. Maybe we should go inside and talk calmly. We're fine right here, I said. Vanessa crossed her arms. Mom, if you don't stop this, you're going to regret it. I felt the wind shift around us, carrying the faint smell of sea salt from the coast. The threat in her voice didn't scare me. It only confirmed what I already knew. I said quietly, I already did regret something. Vanessa, I regretted trusting you for too long. She froze. For a second, her expression cracked, the anger slipping into something that almost looked like guilt. But it disappeared as fast as it came. You have no proof, she hissed. None. I tilted my head slightly. That's what you think. Brian tugged her arm, trying to pull her back toward the car. Let's go. Van. This isn't helping. She shook him off, her voice rising. No. She needs to understand what she's doing. You're destroying this family. Mom, you're ruining everything I built. What you built? I repeated softly. With my name, my money. Her jaw clenched. You're unbelievable. I stepped forward just enough that she could see I wasn't afraid. You should leave. The next people you'll be talking to aren't me. For a moment, no one moved. Then Brian exhaled and took her by the arm again. Come on, Van. Let's just go. They turned and walked down the steps, their voices sharp and low as they argued. I watched until their car disappeared around the corner. The sound of their tires faded, leaving only the wind again. Inside, the quiet felt heavier than before, but not lonely. I sat at the kitchen table and called Sarah. She answered on the first ring. They came, I said. Tried to intimidate me. She didn't sound surprised. Good thing you didn't let them in. I'll add that to the notes. Did they say anything specific, threats? Mostly. Emotional ones. The usual. That's fine, she said calmly. Just remember. Silence is your strongest weapon now. They want a reaction. Don't give it to them. After I hung up, I made tea and sat by the window again. The ocean was dark. The waves white against the gray sky. I thought about how many times I had sat in this exact spot, waiting for Vanessa to visit. Waiting for her voice. Her smile. Her company. Now. All that waiting felt like a different lifetime. Around midnight, I checked my email. There was one new message. From the Oregon Credit Union's fraud department. They had completed their preliminary investigation and confirmed multiple unauthorized withdrawals over the past year, totaling nearly $12,000. I stared at the number for a long time. It wasn't just about the money. It was the years it represented. All those extra shifts at the diner, the nights I skipped dinner so she could have new shoes. I closed my laptop and pressed my hands together, letting the truth settle in my chest. The investigation was proof, and proof was power. I didn't sleep much that night, but I wasn't restless. My mind felt clear. By morning, I had a plan. I called Sarah and told her I wanted to move forward. Whatever steps were next, I was ready to take them. She said she would begin drafting the formal complaint and that it might be time to consider a restraining order if things escalated. Her tone was calm but firm. After I hung up, I went outside to the garden. The early light made everything look clean and sharp. The air was cold enough to sting, but it felt good against my skin. I pulled a few weeds, trimmed the old hydrangeas, and thought about the life I'd built from nothing. Every plant, every stone, every hour of work was mine. Nobody could take that from me again. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman who had finally remembered her own strength. The wind picked up, carrying the faintest sound of the sea. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. Somewhere out there, I knew Vanessa was panicking, trying to figure out what I'd done. And that thought, quiet and steady, was enough to make me smile. That morning, I drove to Newport earlier than usual. The fog still heavy over the highway. My hands stayed tight on the wheel the entire way, even though there was barely any traffic. I wasn't nervous, just determined. Sarah had called the night before and told me the paperwork was ready. Today, we would make everything official. Her office was quiet when I arrived. The receptionist offered me coffee and smiled like she already knew why I was there. When Sarah came out, she was carrying a thick folder. She motioned for me to sit, then spread the papers across her desk. "All right, Margaret," she said, her tone calm and deliberate. "This is the formal complaint to the county's fraud division. And this one here authorizes us to request a full financial investigation through your bank. Once these are filed, it begins. Are you ready?" I nodded. My voice didn't shake when I said, "Let's do it." She handed me a pen, and as I signed each document, I could feel something shifting inside me. Each signature felt like a small reclaiming of control, a quiet act of strength. When we finished, Sarah glanced at me and said, "There's something else I think you should have." She opened a drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Keep this on you. If Vanessa contacts you again, record everything. Dates, times, words. The more detail, the better." I took it and turned it over in my hand. It was smaller than I expected. Light, but solid. I slipped it into my purse and thanked her. By the time I left the office, the fog had started to lift. I stopped at a diner near the bay for lunch. Sitting by the window, I could see boats drifting out toward the open water. For a brief moment, I let myself breathe. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Vanessa. "We need to talk. You're making a huge mistake. Call me before you do something you'll regret." I stared at the screen for a moment, then turned on the recorder before calling her back. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was cold and tight. "Mom. What the hell are you doing? I just got a call from the bank's fraud department. They're saying there's an investigation under your name. You can't do that. You're ruining me." "No," I said evenly. "I'm correcting what you did." She scoffed. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're letting that lawyer woman poison you. I was only trying to help. By stealing my money, by using my credit, that's not how it happened." She snapped. "You signed those papers. You gave me permission." I felt my heartbeat steady. "No. Vanessa, I didn't. And you're about to find out exactly what I signed." There was a long pause on the other end. Then she said quietly, "You can't prove anything." I ended the call. That night, I replayed the conversation on the recorder. Hearing her voice from a distance made everything clearer. The lies, the guilt, the manipulation. Sarah would know exactly what to do with it. The next day, I met Sarah again and handed her the device. She listened carefully, her expression calm but firm. "This is good," she said. "It confirms everything. We'll send this to the investigators. But Margaret, you should know something. Once they receive this, things might move quickly. Your daughter could be contacted directly. Be prepared for that." I nodded. I was more than prepared. That evening, the phone rang again. But I didn't answer. Then came another call. This time, from Brian. His voice on the voicemail was pleading. "Mrs. Hill, please. Vanessa's falling apart. She says you're trying to destroy her. Can't we talk about this privately?" Privately. That word made my stomach turn. The following morning, a different number appeared on my phone. It was from the fraud division. The investigator introduced himself as David Parker. He said he'd received my file and would begin reviewing the transactions that week. We spoke for nearly 20 minutes. He was polite and straightforward. At the end of the call, he said, "I need to ask, Mrs. Hill, do you want to pursue this formally? Once we move forward, it becomes a legal record." I didn't hesitate. "Yes." Later that afternoon, I received an email confirmation. The case was officially open. That night, I couldn't sleep. But it wasn't fear keeping me awake. It was adrenaline. The feeling of finally moving forward after being silent for too long. I sat at the kitchen table, looking at the folder Sarah had prepared, at my own name typed neatly across the top. For years, my name had been something other people used to get what they wanted. Now, it was mine again. A few days passed quietly. Then, one Friday evening, there was a knock at my door. I peeked through the curtain and saw Vanessa standing alone on the porch. Her hair was messy, her eyes red. I opened the door halfway. She looked at me like she didn't recognize the woman in front of her. "Mom, please," she said softly. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. The wind blew through the trees behind her. "Finally," I said. "You have 5 minutes." She stepped inside, glancing around the empty living room like it was the first time she'd noticed how bare it was. "You sold everything," she said quietly. "Why would you do that? To see how you'd react?" I said. "And you didn't disappoint me." Her face hardened. "You think you're so clever. You have no idea what you've started." I turned toward the table and picked up the recorder, setting it down where she could see it. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me. "You're recording this?" I didn't answer. For a moment, she just stood there, shaking slightly. Then she said, "You're my mother. How could you do this to me?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. The girl I raised was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned to weaponize guilt and tears. I said softly, "No. Vanessa, the question is, how could you do this to me?" She opened her mouth. But no sound came out. Then she turned and walked out without another word. The door closed behind her with a dull click. I sat down again. My heart steady, not racing. I pressed the stop button on the recorder and placed it back in the folder. The air in the room felt lighter somehow. Outside, I watched her car pull away, the headlights disappearing down the road. I knew that whatever came next, there was no turning back now. The line had been drawn, and for the first time, it was me who drew it. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Sarah. The investigation had already moved forward. The fraud division had verified my statements. And now a civil action could be filed. I stared at the words on the screen until they blurred. Part of me still couldn't believe it was real. Later that day, Sarah called. Her tone was calm, professional as always. "Margaret, it's time. We have enough evidence to file a civil suit and possibly refer the case for criminal review. I'll need your signature one last time." When I hung up, I sat quietly at my table, the afternoon light slanting across the floor. I thought of Vanessa as a baby, how she used to fall asleep with her hand wrapped around my finger. I thought of all the nights I had stayed up working just so she could have what she wanted. Then I remembered her, standing on my porch, lying straight to my face. I picked up my keys and drove to Sarah's office. She had everything ready. Neat stacks of papers labeled with bright yellow tabs. When I finished signing the last one, she looked up at me and said, "Margaret, once these are submitted, your daughter will be officially notified." "Good," I said simply. As I was leaving, she stopped me. "One more thing. The investigator found something new. There's a personal loan in your name from 2 years ago. $5,000. The money went to a renovation company that worked on your daughter's house." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the exhaustion deep in my bones. "She used my name again." Sarah nodded. "And your credit score took the hit when she didn't make the payments. But we can include this in the suit. It strengthens your case." That night I barely ate. I just sat at the kitchen table, looking at the empty spaces around me. I thought about how many times I'd told Vanessa she could count on me, how many times I'd meant it. And now she had taken that promise and turned it into something poisonous. The next morning, a car pulled up outside. I peeked through the curtain and saw Brian getting out. I didn't open the door. He stood there for a while, shifting from foot to foot, before finally speaking through the glass. "Mrs. Hill, please. Just 5 minutes. I want to fix this." I didn't move. He sighed. "Vanessa's not thinking straight. She's scared. She's talking about lawyers, about moving away. If you could just drop this, I'll make sure the money's returned." I finally opened the door a few inches. "You can't fix this with money, Brian." He ran a hand through his hair. Frustrated. "She's my wife. I'm trying to keep her from falling apart." "Then maybe you should have stopped her from stealing before she started." He didn't know what to say to that. He muttered something about mistakes and left. His car disappeared down the street, leaving behind only the faint smell of exhaust. That evening, Sarah called again. She said Vanessa had been served with the notice. Apparently, the process server found her at home, and she refused to take the papers at first. Then she tore open the envelope, right there on the porch, and started shouting. The neighbors heard every word. By nightfall, I had 4 missed calls from Vanessa and 2 long voicemails. In one, she cried. In the other, she screamed, "Mom, you can't do this to me. You're humiliating me. Everyone will know. Do you want me to lose everything?" I listened without emotion. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I had nothing left to give her. The next morning, I drove to the grocery store. As I was walking down the frozen food aisle, I ran into a woman I knew from church. she said. "Oh. I saw something about your daughter online. I hope everything's all right." I forced a small smile. "We're sorting things out," I said, and walked away. My heart was steady. Whatever rumors were spreading, they no longer had the power to shame me. When I got home, there was a message from David Parker, the investigator. He said the bank had confirmed $17,000 in fraudulent activity linked directly to accounts accessed from Vanessa's home IP address. 17,000. I thanked him, hung up, and stood at the window, watching the sky darken over the ocean. Later that night, Alice came over with a pot of soup. She didn't ask questions. She just set it on the stove and said, "I heard they served her." I nodded. "Good," she said. "About time." We ate quietly. Then she looked at me and said, "You know, she'll try to twist the story. People like that always do." I smiled faintly. "Let her try. The truth's in black and white now." The following week was oddly peaceful. The paperwork was done. The case was filed. And Vanessa's silence stretched longer than I expected. Every evening, I sat outside, listening to the ocean and letting the sound fill the empty places inside me. Then, one Thursday morning, Sarah called. Her voice was calm but held a hint of satisfaction. "Margaret." Her attorney reached out. "They're asking about a settlement." I froze. What kind of settlement? A full repayment of the stolen money plus damages. But there's something else. She's also agreed to issue a public statement of acknowledgement. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I asked. "She's really going to admit it?" Sarah hesitated. "It's the only way she avoids a criminal charge." When I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring out the window. I thought about all the lies, the threats, the tears, and then I thought about what it would mean for her to finally say the truth out loud. That night, as I walked to the mailbox, the air smelled of salt and rain. I stopped halfway down the path and looked back at the house. It was small and quiet, but it was mine. Every inch of it had been rebuilt, not with money, but with courage. Inside, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the table. The phone was silent for once. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint crash of waves in the distance. "Tomorrow," Sarah said, "the settlement papers would be ready for me to sign." For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally exhale. The war wasn't over yet. But the ground had shifted. I looked at the stack of documents on my kitchen counter, neatly labeled and sealed. Then I whispered to myself, "This time, the signature will be mine and mine alone." The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The light hadn't yet touched the horizon, and the ocean outside was still a dark sheet of glass. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the papers spread in front of me. Sarah had emailed me the final settlement documents late last night. At the top, in bold letters, was my daughter's name, Vanessa Hill, defendant. Seeing it printed there made my stomach twist. But I didn't look away. At 9 sharp, I drove into town. The courthouse in Lincoln County sat on a hill overlooking the bay. A small, plain building with weathered steps and seagulls circling overhead. Inside, it smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. Sarah was waiting for me in the hallway outside the courtroom. She wore her usual calm expression, her briefcase tucked neatly under her arm. She gave me a reassuring nod. Ready? I wasn't sure if anyone was ever really ready for something like this, but I nodded anyway. When the doors opened, I saw Vanessa sitting at the opposite table with her attorney. She looked smaller than I remembered, her posture stiff, her hair pulled back tightly, like she was holding herself together by sheer force. Brian sat behind her, his eyes fixed on the floor. The judge entered, a tall man with a serious face and a voice that carried even when he spoke softly. The proceedings began. Sarah stood first, presenting the evidence, the fraudulent withdrawals, the forged applications, the recorded call, and finally, the investigator's report. Every word landed like a stone in the quiet room. Vanessa's lawyer tried to argue that it was a misunderstanding, that the transactions had been authorized, that I had simply forgotten or been confused. But when Sarah played the audio recording of Vanessa admitting she was only trying to help, the courtroom went still. I watched my daughter's face as she heard her own voice echo through the speakers. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered something. But she didn't look at him. She just stared straight ahead. Eyes glassy, jaw tight. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, Vanessa stood slowly. Her voice wavered at first. I didn't mean to hurt my mother. I thought I was managing things for her. Sarah interrupted gently. Did you use her name to open credit cards? Ms. Now. Hill. Vanessa hesitated, then nodded once. Did you take loans under her identity? Her voice dropped to a whisper. Yes. And did you withdraw money from her account, without her permission? There was a long pause before she answered. Yes. The judge leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. Ms. Hill. This court takes financial elder abuse very seriously. You've admitted to multiple instances of fraud totaling $17,000. Fortunately, your mother has chosen to resolve this matter through a civil settlement instead of pursuing criminal charges. I felt Sarah's hand brush mine briefly, grounding me. The judge continued. Outlining the settlement terms, Vanessa was to repay the full amount plus an additional $5,000 in damages within 6 months. She was to issue a public statement acknowledging her actions. And she was prohibited from accessing any of my financial accounts in the future. Failure to comply would result in the case reopening under criminal review. When he asked if I accepted the terms, I stood and said, Yes, Your Honor. Vanessa didn't look at me as the papers were signed. She just kept her head down, her pen moving slowly, her hand shaking. When the judge adjourned, she remained seated while everyone else stood. I watched her for a long moment before walking out of the courtroom. Outside, the sky had turned bright and sharp, the kind of cold blue that only comes after rain. Sarah walked beside me quietly until we reached the steps. You did it, she said softly. I let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like release. Later that afternoon, I sat in a small cafe near the harbor with a cup of tea. The place was half empty, the sound of the espresso machine humming in the background. I opened my phone and saw the post Sarah had mentioned earlier. Vanessa had already published her statement. The words were short, clearly written by her lawyer. I acknowledge that I committed financial misconduct against my mother, Margaret Hill. I take full responsibility for my actions and am cooperating with legal restitution. Below the post were dozens of comments, some sympathetic, some angry, others simply stunned. I didn't read them all. I just stared at my daughter's name and the simple truth beneath it. For once, the truth didn't belong to her version of the story. It belonged to me. That evening, I called Sarah to thank her. She told me the funds would begin transferring into my new account within 30 days. We spoke for a while about logistics. Then she paused before hanging up. Margaret, you should know that your strength made this possible. Most people never take it this far. After she hung up, I sat in silence for a while. Strength wasn't what I felt. It was exhaustion. Maybe. Or relief, dressed up as courage. A few hours later, as the sun set over the water, I walked outside to the porch. The air was cool and smelled of salt and pine. For the first time in months, my phone was quiet. No voicemails. No messages. No threats. Just stillness. I thought about how things used to be. The Friday dinners. The laughter that came easily. The way I once believed that love alone could keep a family together. But love without respect is a slow kind of theft too. I realized. A car drove by in the distance, its headlights sweeping across the road before disappearing into the curve. I wondered if Vanessa had driven past my house since the hearing. I wondered if she would ever look at me again without anger or shame. Then I stopped wondering. I went back inside and poured myself a glass of water. On the kitchen table lay the signed settlement copy, still in its envelope. I placed it in the drawer next to the small box that held my old documents. Everything that had once been used against me was now proof of what I had survived. As the night deepened, I stood by the window and watched the waves move under the moonlight. The ocean didn't keep score. It just kept going. Endless and steady. So did I. Tomorrow, Sarah would finalize the paperwork, and Vanessa's first payment would be due in 30 days. After that, I could finally start planning the next chapter of my life. I turned off the light, letting the quiet fill the room. And for the first time in years, I felt like the world outside and the world inside me were finally at peace. The following week passed quietly. Almost too quietly. The air along the coast felt lighter, as if the storms that had hovered over me for months had finally drifted somewhere else. I started my mornings with long walks along the beach, watching the sun climb above the water. Sometimes I saw couples walking dogs, or retirees collecting driftwood. And it struck me how normal life could look when you stopped carrying other people's burdens. The first payment arrived on a Tuesday. The notification from the bank popped up on my phone as I was trimming the rose bushes in the garden. The deposit was exact, to the cent. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because of the money itself, but because it was the first tangible proof that the tide had turned. That afternoon, I drove into town to run errands. The hardware store clerk, a young man with kind eyes, helped me load bags of soil into my car. "You starting a garden project?" "Mrs. Hill?" he asked. "Something like that," I said, smiling. Back home, I worked in the yard until my back ached. It felt good. Using my hands again. Doing something that had nothing to do with lawyers or banks or signatures. As I planted the first new rose bush, I thought about how long it had been since I'd done something purely for myself. A few days later, I received an unexpected call. It was Brian. His voice was quiet, polite. "Mrs. Hill, I just wanted you to know that Vanessa made the payment. She's trying to, well, she's doing what the court asked," I said. "That's good to hear." He hesitated. "She's been different since the hearing. Quieter. I think she finally understands what she did." I didn't respond right away. "Maybe she does," I said finally. "But understanding doesn't erase what's been done." I could hear him exhale. "I know. I just thought you should hear it from me." After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a while, staring out the window at the ocean. I didn't feel anger anymore, or even sadness. Just distance, like a door had closed between us. Soft, but permanent. That night, as I made tea, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. It was from Vanessa. It said, "Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm sorry. I'm trying to fix what I can." I stared at the words for a long time, unsure how to respond. Finally, I typed back, "Thank you for saying that. I hope you mean it." Then I set the phone down and didn't wait for a reply. The next morning, I met Alice for coffee at the little cafe near the harbor. She looked me up and down and said, "You look lighter. Like someone who finally took off a heavy coat." I laughed softly. "Maybe I did." She leaned closer. "Did you see the post your daughter made online?" I frowned. "No." Alice pulled out her phone and scrolled. "Here," she said, turning the screen toward me. It was a picture of Vanessa standing by the water, her hair loose in the wind. The caption read, Sometimes, the hardest lessons come from the people who love us the most. I'm still learning. Still trying to be better. The comments were mostly sympathetic. Some were skeptical. I handed the phone back to Alice. "Do you believe her?" she asked. I took a sip of coffee before answering. "I believe she's trying to believe herself." For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about that post. There had been a time when I would have clung to any sign of remorse, desperate to rebuild what we'd lost. But now, the need to fix things was gone. The peace I felt wasn't fragile anymore. It didn't depend on her apology. It came from knowing I had finally chosen myself. Later that evening, I went through my old boxes in the closet. I found a photograph of Vanessa when she was 5, standing in the front yard of our old house, holding a sunflower almost taller than she was. She had dirt on her cheeks and the brightest smile I'd ever seen. I ran my thumb over the image and whispered, "I hope you find that girl again." Then I slid the photo into a new frame and set it on the mantel. Not out of longing, but as a reminder that love could exist even after it broke. The following weekend, Sarah called one last time to confirm that all payments were on schedule and the court had officially closed the file. "It's over," she said, her voice warm with satisfaction. "You did it. Margaret, thank you. Sarah, for everything. You know," she said, "most people your age would have walked away. But you didn't. That's something worth being proud of." After we hung up, I stepped out onto the porch. The sky was streaked with gold and lavender, the waves glinting in the fading light. The roses I'd planted were already blooming, soft pink against the dark soil. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like waiting for something or someone. The quiet wasn't loneliness anymore. It was peace. Inside, the phone buzzed again. Another transfer notification. I smiled faintly and set it aside without opening it. I didn't need to check. I trusted the system I had built with my own hands, my own choices. As the light faded, I brewed another cup of tea and carried it out to the porch. The air smelled of salt and flowers. The ocean rolled on, endless and patient, reminding me that healing, like the tide, comes in its own rhythm. In that moment, I realized I didn't need my daughter's forgiveness or the world's approval. What I had now was mine, earned not through love or loss, but through clarity. I took a deep breath and whispered to the evening air, "It's enough." And for the first time in a long time, I truly meant it. A few months later, the rhythm of my life had changed completely. Mornings started slowly now, with coffee on the porch and the soft hum of the ocean in the background. I had learned the sound of peace again, how it moved, like the tide, steady and forgiving. The garden had grown wild and beautiful, full of roses, lavender, and tall white daisies that swayed with the wind. It looked like a place that had been loved, not controlled. The final payment came in early September. I opened the message from the bank, confirmed the deposit, and then quietly deleted it. I didn't need a reminder. The money was never the point. It was proof that I had survived, that I had rebuilt something my daughter couldn't take away. That same afternoon, I went into town to close one of the old accounts. The bank manager, a woman named Teresa, smiled when she saw me. She said she remembered me from when I first came in all those months ago, frightened and unsure. "Now," she said, "you look like a woman who got her life back." I smiled. Maybe I did. When I got home, I sat on the porch again, the warm light spilling over the railing. The air smelled of pine and salt, and I thought about everything that had happened. It felt like looking at someone else's life. Distant but clear. The version of me that had once waited for Friday dinners and phone calls was gone. In her place was someone quieter but stronger. Someone who didn't mistake love for surrender. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar. Vanessa. The envelope was thin, just one folded page inside. I hesitated before opening it. Her words were short and careful. Mom, I've been going to counseling. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope you're doing well. I really do. I read it twice. Then folded it back up. I didn't cry. But my chest ached in that old familiar way. I placed the letter inside my drawer next to the settlement copy and the first photo I ever framed of her as a little girl holding a sunflower. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something close to honesty. And maybe that was enough. Later that evening, Alice came over for dinner. We sat on the porch with grilled fish and white wine. The sky turned gold. Then pink. She said, "You know, I think you've finally reached the other side of it." I laughed softly. Maybe. It took a while to get here. She nodded. The thing about survival, Maggie, is that it's not loud. It's quiet. Like this. I looked out at the ocean. The horizon stretching endlessly. I thought of all the times I'd wanted to scream. To demand answers or apologies. Now. Silence felt like closure. When Alice left, I cleaned up the dishes and went inside. The house was small but warm, full of the scent of the roses I'd cut that morning. I walked into my bedroom, where my suitcase sat by the door. Tomorrow, I was leaving for a short trip to Santa Cruz. Nothing dramatic. Just a few days by the coast. A change of view. My first trip alone in years. Before going to bed, I opened the old folder one last time. I pulled out the authorization form. The one Vanessa had thought she tricked me into signing. At the bottom, in bold black ink, was Sarah Coleman's signature. Not mine. That single act had changed everything. I smiled as I slid it back into place. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I packed the last of my things and made one final cup of coffee. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. I stepped outside and stood in the garden. The roses were blooming again. Pink and full. Their petals heavy with dew. I whispered softly, almost to myself, I did it. As I walked to the car, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. Not the kind that comes from victory, but from freedom. The road out of town curved along the water. I rolled down the window and let the breeze wash over me. The ocean glittered in the distance, endless and alive. For the first time, I wasn't running from anything or anyone. I was simply moving forward. When I reached the edge of the highway, I looked back once at the small house behind me, at the garden, at the porch that had seen both heartbreak and healing. Then I turned the key and drove toward the sunrise. If you've ever rebuilt yourself after being broken, you know this feeling. The quiet kind of power that doesn't need to prove anything. The kind that says, I survived. And I'm still here. So, if you're listening to this and you've ever doubted your strength, remember this story. Remember that it's never too late to reclaim your peace, your dignity, and your life. And if my story meant something to you, stay with me for more like it. Because sometimes, the stories we share are how we remind each other that we're never really alone.